morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Maryland Online webinar, Under Pressure, Designing Education Escape Rooms. My name is Ron Hansen from Chesapeake College, Director of Instructional Systems, and I will be your moderator today. It's our pleasure to welcome Dr. Rachael Zeleny. Dr. Rachael Zeleny is the Writing Program Director at the University of Baltimore. She is also an associate professor teaching for the English department and the Department of Integrated Arts. Many of her classes include elements of social justice, experiential learning via museum trips, and gamification. Her recent publications explore ways we might increase engagement with physical spaces and academic content through a gamified lens. Dr. Zeleny is especially interested in how the escape room framework can be used within an educational setting. Before I hand it over to Dr. Zeleny, please make sure you are muted during the presentation. You may enter questions into the chat at any time, and we will break in as needed. Also, please sign into the chat with your name and your institution. Thank you very much. Dr. Zeleny?
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I was just saying before everyone logged on how funny it has been to shift fields a little bit. I was historically somebody who was studying Victorian actresses and the pre-Raphaelite artists and, the suffrage movement. And when I would go to MLA or CEA, I'd have 3 or 4 people, apologetically in the audience, sitting and listening to my work. And ever since I've started doing the presentations on escape rooms and gamification of the classroom, that audience has just grown so much. So it's been fun to see that this is such a timely point in order to be having these kind of conversations. In the chat, I'm putting the link to my presentation, and I'm doing that because many of my slides have other links for you to use, including the templates for the escape rooms. I'm giving you all of those today. So just as a heads up, that is also in the chat. I think I might have changed my title a little bit. I keep sort of massaging it to be what I want it to be. So I had recently just done Escape Ed, Gamifying the Classroom, but it's still the same presentation. Okay, so I guess one of my first questions is if you wouldn't mind just using the thumbs up button within the gallery to tell me how many of you have gone to an escape room and successfully escaped. I was just wanted to sort of see, I enjoy seeing like how many people have actually kind of like entered this trend of escape room and are starting to do this. So if you've successfully escaped from an escape room, can you put a thumbs up either in the chat or in your Zoom window? I'm only seeing a handful of thumbs up, so this either means that all of you are still in an escape room or you haven't tried them yet. Oh, a couple of people. Okay, wonderful. So for those of you who aren't familiar with an escape room, the concept is pretty simple. You're in a single room, and then throughout the room there are puzzles that you need to solve in order to eventually get to the final puzzle, which will let you get out. They're thematically created. Sometimes it'll be you're escaping a pirate ship. Sometimes I just recently escaped an Al Capone house, an Edgar Allan Poe house, and things along that line. Even though the puzzles are, sort of logical and riddles and things along those lines and really are a lot of fun to do, they typically do lack educational content. And so this is the question that I was asking myself, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, is how could I sort of like garner the popularity of these escape rooms and the virtual escape rooms into something that could improve student engagement when I was teaching. So the class I was teaching before I came up with this concept was called Arts and Society. And what we would do is we would go into museums and my students would walk around through the museum and they would be looking for issues of diversity, inclusion, and access. So the idea was they were essentially giving the museum a report card on how well they thought they were hitting those marks in those 3 categories. And then students would create a new exhibit and curators were coming in, and then they were judging their presentations by telling them which of the new exhibits would actually be possible and what were the limitations and obstacles of what they'd created. And I loved this class so much. So when the pandemic began, I could not figure out how in the world I was going to translate this concept into, something that was going to work virtually. So it began by asking the curators if they could still give us virtual tours of the museums so that we could try to do it just by, walking around through a museum virtually. And we quickly realized that because of how many of the staff were furloughed, that no one was going to be available to do this kind of work for us. So I completely shifted my framework into this idea that we would make materials for the museum instead of the museum having to make things for us. And then we expanded our reach by contacting public school teachers during the pandemic and saying, we will also make virtual materials for you. And so they would tell us what the content of their course was, and then the students would end up making the virtual escape rooms for them. So some of the other components of a virtual escape room is that they do have a sense of urgency. There's always a time limit for them, typically an hour. So you only have an hour to quote unquote break out. And this does add some pressure, to the situation. But in the education world, what we're exploring is the way that that pressure is similar to taking a test, but doesn't create the same kind of anxiety because it's held under this umbrella of fun and because it's collaborative. So the data is showing that they're retaining the same kind of information as if they were preparing for a test, but in fact, information retention is better because there's the positive association with the pressure instead of the negative. This is the people who are studying escape rooms the most in what I found are Army, Sanchez, and Perez. And so just again, even though our typical sort of like conventional exercises of, learning material is then created with this kind of novel, system that allows them to do things together and still face urgency. So as I began doing research on the escape rooms, I found out that there were some other universities that had begun to use the escape room framework in a pre-pandemic landscape in some really interesting ways. So on this slide, I've actually given you a link to a bunch of other ways that escape rooms are being used other than what I'm going to present today. So if you finish my presentation or like, that's really interesting, but none of this applies to me, hopefully that link will give you some other ways of thinking about this. But as one example, I've gone to an escape room where it's meant to provide medical students with the pressure of diagnosing within a certain amount of time by creating a physical hospital room that students have to enter and then solve all of the different, diagnoses and symptoms and other things around the room in order to get out on time. And it's meant to simulate you do actually have to, diagnose and treat within a certain amount of time in order to help a patient. There are conflict negotiation escape rooms. I'll get back to the library orientation escape room in just a minute. Analyzing crime scenes. So putting you into either a physical or a virtual room where the students would need to work through, different forensic clues and other things in order to be able to discern what happened in that room. One of the most interesting ones to me is they're using this in the social work field, where they're creating virtual and physical spaces that you would need to walk through in order to be able to determine whether abuse is happening within a house. So again, these puzzles then become educational because you'd need to know the content in order to be able to successfully complete your task. This is a picture of my students and I in one of the physical escape rooms. So we managed to get out in 52 minutes. So if you see that you only have an hour, we were right at the edge there, but we did manage to get out. So I just wanted to brag a little bit that we did manage to escape. So in my world, these are the ways that I've been using the escape rooms. So during the pandemic, I was using them as virtual field trips. I was using them as virtual murder mysteries. And then in person, we have something called Doors Open Baltimore, which means that for one Saturday out of the year, for about 5 hours, historic buildings are open to the public. And they were finding that, especially for families, they didn't have a lot of things for people to do as they were exploring the buildings. So they wanted something to accompany this experience so that, especially for parents who had brought teenagers or kids, that there was some kind of gamified experience for going through the buildings. So we started creating the in-person scavenger hunts or in-person escape rooms that would accompany events like this. One of my more recent and popular ways of using this is for library information literacy. And this evolved because a teaching assistant of mine was working at the Enoch Pratt Library, and the number of students who get dropped off to a library at the end of a school day, especially in a city, is a large number. And so she was in charge of doing the programming for these kids who sort of just were dropped off, but trying to figure out, what to do with them when they definitely didn't want to continue doing schoolwork at the end of the day. But she had to keep them safe and had to keep them entertained until a parent would come and pick them up. She was feeling really overwhelmed. So since she was my teaching assistant that semester, we decided we would completely shift gears and figure out how we could use the same escape room framework to teach information literacy to these students who were being dropped off. And then we started creating materials for libraries. And then last but not least, the one that people seem to invite me to come and talk about the most is I've been using escape rooms as a means for teaching allyship and empathy in the workplace. And these have been close reading escape rooms that walk you through different scenarios where it's more or less a choose your own adventure of how you would respond to the situation in order to escape a toxic conversation. Anytime I give this presentation, people always say that that's the one that they would that they need the most in the workplace. So for the in-person escape rooms, this is kind of a model of what they look like. So they are given a briefcase, and the idea is that the libraries can exchange the briefcases with other libraries. So you can interlibrary loan them. So if you at the Enoch Pratt Hamilton branch have already, several groups have already come through and done the escape room, then the Enoch Pratt, Baltimore we can just send the briefcase over there and then it can travel. And so the idea was that we really wanted these escape rooms to be something that could be contained and didn't have to be full set design and things like that that wouldn't be possible to recreate in another setting. So as you'll see in this briefcase, there's approximately 10 riddles, which are represented by these different envelopes in the briefcase. And then there are a couple other objects that are, correspond with the puzzles. But the envelopes are placed inside of books throughout the library. So the clues will typically take you to either titles or authors or call numbers as the way of moving through the library. And then some of these other objects are interactive. So this green book right here, when you open it, it plays music, and then you'd have to figure out what song it's playing. And then from the song, you'd have to figure out which book in the library is going to tell you about the composer. So some of them do have interactive components, but the idea was that it was as transferable as possible, as easy to pass from one library to another as possible. And that each one comes with a set of instructions for the librarian about which books in the library you'll need to have in order to make the escape room work. I wanted to show you the picture on the left because I notably said no set design, but I'm the type of person who's just a little extra, so I can't help it. So if it's an escape room that I'm running, I do tend to, put these objects all throughout the escape room to kind of add to, the feel of being in an escape room. So this was a Harry Potter one, so I had a bunch of Halloween decorations and things like that, and I got to the library in advance, and I just kind of sprinkled these throughout the library. And it's not overwhelming, but it was enough to try to make it feel like they were doing something special that day. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat in case anybody has a question. So also in person, one of the things that I've been trying to do is I create study breaks for the college students when it's during final exam week. So this one is a Wednesday Addams themed escape room. And so you'll tell this one, I went full set design. So the librarians were laughing at me because I just kept bringing in, tubs and tubs of things from my car. And we're currently missing, half the decor in my house because I brought, most of it to the basement of the study room for my students. And for those of you who have seen Wednesday Addams, I recreated her dorm room in the basement. So, everything's just very, I went to Michael's, after Halloween and bought everything, on clearance and bought a bunch of things for my house and just kind of filled the basement with it. But this is just sort of a glimpse of like what one of the walls, looks like for the escape room. And then you can see the students interacting with this space. So we've noticed that trying to get students to actually engage in things during finals week when we try to do these stress relievers or other things, that no one ever shows up. So we ended up having 172 students come through this escape room when we ran it last year, and we actually only gave them a day notice. So we were really excited that this many people came. Just recently, NPR, the WYPR branch, interviewed us about, sort of the success of what we've been doing. And then I've been going to local high schools and local middle schools, teaching those teachers how to make the escape rooms as well. So this really has been a lot of fun. And my daughter was very proud of the cousin it that she made for the Wednesday Addams. So she insisted that I show all of you the cousin it that she made. So I promised her I would. Okay, so this is what you came for. This is how to do it if you're doing things virtually. So in order to do things virtually, this began because I was working with the Peter Township Library in Pittsburgh. So during the pandemic, they created a virtual escape room about Harry Potter. And it went viral, and then it was translated into 5 different languages. And I don't think any of them expected that it was going to have that kind of success. And so they just really, were really surprised by how this took off and, what happened with it after, because it was just made through Google Forms. But it was because it was made during a time when so many people were looking for something like this and looking for ways to engage kids at home. And so I reached out to the librarians at the Peter Township Library, and I was like, you need to show me how to do this, because I need to learn how to make this for my students. And then I want to be able to, teach other teachers how to do this. And so they gave me kind of the basic framework of using Google Forms. And they said, it's free, it's the easiest, platform that everyone already has access to. We know that there's other platforms that do it better, but this is going to be the thing that, as a library that's promoting people being able to do free things, this is what we're standing by as how we want to, distribute it. So they gave all these rules and all of these, ways to create, directions to the computer that would help you figure out, how to make the computer move from one question to the other. And to be honest, it was somewhat overwhelming until I got a hold of it. And so the first 2 semesters I taught it, I would teach the students how to make all of the directions for the computer that would have it, progress in the next way. But it was taking 3-4 weeks out of my semester in order to teach the technology. And so I was just like, I can't keep doing that. So I need to find something that's easier in terms of being able to teach this, so I'm not wasting all this teaching time. So what I came up with was, you can make templates in Google Forms. And once I realized that you can make templates in Google Forms, then it just, everything expedited so much. So what I've given you in this first link is a template for sort of a general escape room. So this would be for, any kind of topic that you would want to map onto. What I'm giving you would go into this template. So as you can see, it starts with directions for what to do in each part of the escape room components. And so right here, it says title here, and then underneath it says change theme and the colors using the palette in the upper right-hand corner. And then I give you links for even how to make some of the graphics, right? Because I'm not a graphic designer. So this is a skill that I have. I don't know how to do animation. I don't know how to make things, I don't know how to make things do fancy things. So I found, links that will already make the types of materials that I wanted to use. So as an example, this first link here, the breakyourownnews.com, when you go there, it will allow you to make a graphic that makes it look like, a news event has happened in the location, where your escape room is set. So right here, it says death at the Walters, and it's referring to the Walters Art Museum. And underneath it says art, crime, and crocodiles. And then underneath, I created, a fake ticket. So it looks like you actually had to pay for a ticket to go to this escape room using the fake ticket generator. So what I've tried to do is really take out the amount of technology that you'd need to learn, or the amount of graphic design you'd need to learn, and replace it with links and directions that will make this kind of material for you. So one of the hardest hurdles to get over with teaching this to students is creating a storyline. And so for this, I can suggest a couple of different things. One, you can just kind of like look up other escape rooms that already exist and just give them, say your general storyline is that a mummy has, become awake in the middle of the night, and you have to solve X number of puzzles related to, I don't know, chemistry, right? If that's your subject, or X number of puzzles related to, history, in order to put him back to sleep. So it can be a really basic storyline. What we've started to do is we've paired our undergraduate students with some of our graduate creative writers as one of the weeks of class, so that they actually have come up with these sort of more fully fleshed out stories as a new collaboration that we're doing in order to make these even better. But then as it goes through, it'll say, question 1, and then it'll ask a question. And then all of the puzzles, the way that they're solved is that Google Forms has a requirement where you have to answer with a short answer, and your answer has to be exactly right in order for Google Forms to allow you to go to the next puzzle. So in that way, it functions like an escape room, because you're basically unlocking one lock before you can get to the next lock, right? And so my students were having a really hard time coming up with different kinds of puzzles. And we're just really blunt with me and saying, like, Dr. Z, like, I don't think that way. Like, it's not going to happen. So then I started embedding, different kinds of puzzles, so that if they had, I always gave the option that if they wanted to make puzzles of their own, that they certainly could, but that if they didn't, they could just use, the framework of what I'd created to make the puzzles. So for this one, the first puzzle would be a pig pen cipher. So if you notice, there's 26 of these symbols, because each symbol actually is in place of a letter from the alphabet. So their first puzzle would be, needing to translate those symbols into letters. Checking the chat to make sure you don't have questions. Love the breaking news. Okay. Okay. So then I'm going to show you 3 templates that I've created and walk you through, some of the types of puzzles that we actually do in class. And so there's 3 different types of puzzles. One, I make them, and I just make them because, I want it as a fun, like, first day activity. I want it, when I teach empathy and allyship in the workplace as a class that I teach, that class gets really personal and gets really vulnerable. So I want to create a number of activities that encourage them to really be talking to each other, and to kind of like break down, some of the walls that we've built during the pandemic. So I do several different types of these, icebreaker activities, or social emotional learning activities with that class in particular, so that by the time we're talking about, really hard things that have happened in the workplace, they've already had that moment where they had to, where a spider dropped down from the ceiling and they freaked out and they comforted each other. So it really is phenomenal in terms of like how that, that silliness and that play like ends up translating into them being able to talk to each other well later on. The other type is close reading. And for this one, I used to make them as an alternative to, say, an exam. But what I do now is, because the templates work so well, the students make them instead of writing research papers, because the requirements for the close reading escape rooms are way above and beyond what a student would ever have to do for a research paper. And they're multimodal. They require visuals, they require clips from videos, they require, the close reading of the text, and they require analysis and expert analysis. So at first, my university was sort of pushing back to this being the artifact that they were using, in order to assess whether or not they could do the type of research that we said they needed to do. But as soon as they started reading through them, they were like, oh my gosh, this is like 5,000 times more, what anyone was ever doing on a research paper. And I was like, I know. So we do those as well. And then last but not least, we do information literacy escape rooms as well. And this one I'm really excited about because we've been starting to do a lot with this in terms of social justice or issues of inclusion and access. So I'm getting back to my original roots of what I was trying to do. So the assignment that they have this semester is that they are creating these escape rooms in libraries that are taking them to the kind of books that would be, typical that people are trying to ban right now, right? So the escape rooms are really like redirecting them to, the importance of, what these types of stories, give back to the public. So they're really focusing on, these types of experiences that will highlight these books as ones that are included. Okay, so I mentioned that, one of the issues is that escape rooms aren't always educational. They can be fun, but not educational. So with these, so for instance, the one that I created at the Walters Art Museum, it's entirely dependent on really close reading the paintings or actually having to read the plaques next to the paintings. And so they're not going to be able to succeed without doing that. I'm going to close my door really quick. Somebody is doing yard work outside and it's going to get very loud. I'm sorry, 1 second. Okay. So in order for them to solve the puzzles, they can't get away with like not reading the content about the paintings or about the history or things like that. And my husband teaches middle school, and so he's been starting to take what I make about the museums and using them with his middle schoolers, because for any of you who've ever taught at the lower levels, these field trips where you take them to these places is great, but getting them to actually look at paintings, especially not to look at the paintings and not at their phones is a challenge. So he started using these for his classes. So this will be an example of a type of puzzle that you'll see in an escape room. So for an example, this painting right here, I'm going to zoom. Hopefully you can see it well. The man and the woman sitting on this sort of like rocky, ledge, and the woman's glaring at the man who's reading a book. And so what I've asked them to do is, this is in a Victorian crime class. And so we've just been reading a bunch of novels about Victorian crime, and then they've come to this museum. And so I've asked them, the portrait captures the tension in the image below. According to the description, the couple is seated at a blank of diverging paths. So if you wouldn't mind just using the chat, like what are some of the clues in the painting that lets you know this couple may not be getting along very well? Okay. The body language of their backs to each other. Yep. Her face. and sentence. Her face. Yep. Facial expression. Great. He's very into his book. Perfect. Okay, engage with the dog and not with her. Great. Okay, so the space between them. Oh, good. I'm glad you pointed that out. The space between them, absolutely. He's looking at the book instead of her. In fact, when I teach this, I talk to the students about, if he had a cell phone in his hand instead of a book, we'd have a very modern portrait of romance. And in the Victorian era, the dog would have also been a symbol of loyalty. So, the dog is really clearly, chosen the husband, and, he's kind of like broken loyalty with his wife by, taking the energy over there. But when they actually have to read the description, they can't get the right answer unless they read the whole description. So they get the idea that there's, tension between the two, but they won't get the right answer, which is fork, unless they actually read the plaque. So it lets you know that the young couple is at a fork of diverging paths, as noted by the artist. This is an ominous sign for the future. So they have to read the plaque to get the right word. And then there's the hint, which is that fork has been spelled out with this pig pen puzzle that I've shown you over here. So I always give them kind of more than one way of getting the right answer, because I need the escape rooms to work without me being there, right? Like, this is really important, is that the escape rooms have to work without me being the person who leads them. They need to be self-explanatory enough that they work without me there. So the first lock would have been fork. Then there'll be ones like this. This is really fun. So again, this is something else I've given you a link to in order to be able to make this kind of thing. I don't know how to make them. Wait, what just happened? I'm sorry. That was weird. Where did it go? Okay. I guess it's not going to let me hit play on this. I apologize. So the way that this, one of the links that I've given you in the template is for jigsaw.com, and it allows you to, you know, turn anything into a jigsaw puzzle, and then you'd have to like manually put it back in order to get the right answer. So this is the same painting, but it's, the idea is that the very first puzzle was the painting has been torn up and it's been put into the trash can. You need to put it back together in order to figure out, you know, why the wife would have been so upset about how this painting turned out. And then when you put it back together, there's the call number for where the painting is in the museum. You'd have to go actually find it in order to be able to find the plaque. What is happening? Okay, I don't know what that was. That was strange. So other puzzles will do things like this. So it says that in this particular storyline, there's been infidelity. And so he would have to actually go to the armory in order to figure out like which weapon he would most likely choose in order to kill his wife's lover. And so they have to read through, you know, a lot of the different plaques next to the swords to figure out. There's one of them that says like this weapon would be used as the most like personal way to kill someone, right? So they would, and then I've given them the clue again with this time it's in I forget what they're called when you have the pictures in place of a puzzle. Rebus puzzles as the hint to be able to help figure it out. So again, they always have the option of trying to get close to the answer, but if they can't get the right word perfectly, then they should have the hint to be able to get them to the right spot. One of my favorite new additions has been using Wordle puzzles, because I'm obsessed with Wordle and have not jumped off that train yet and still do it every day. So there's the option of you can create your own Wordles that the students will have to do in real time to be able to make the clues as well. Let's see if this will actually play. Let me know if my...
Looks like it's loading.
It's loading? Okay.
Yeah.
So once it's fully loaded, what you're going to see is that one of the great things about Google Maps is that you're able to get a lot of 3D virtual renderings of a room, or the 360-degree photographs. This is taking too long. I'm going to do this a different way. Must not be happy that I'm on Zoom and trying to use Google at the Castify at the same time. Okay, so I don't have access. Okay. Okay, we'll come back to that. So when you go into Google Maps, and when you go to design your own, I'll be happy to show you how to do this more closely. Google Maps has it so that on the left-hand side, there is the option to find different photos of the place that you're trying to go to. And then there's the option where you can actually get 360-degree views of the places that you're trying to go to. So during the pandemic, this was incredibly helpful because I couldn't get into the spaces in order to design the materials. So I needed to be able to lift 360-degree photos of, places in Google Maps as parts of my, as parts of what I was making. So the room over here that you're looking at is called the collector's study. And this was one of the 360-degree views that you can get from the Walters Art Museum. So in this, you'd be able to actually explore the room, be able to like turn around and walk and zoom in and see what was, up on the shelves. So if you'll notice, there's this chair sitting here right in front of the desk. And so the question I asked them is, if you were sitting in that chair and you were eye level with the desk, what is it that you would see? Because in the storyline, I made it that one of the men has left the other men, this like warning sign that, he knows about the affair and that, he's in trouble. So when you sit down at the chair and you're looking directly in front of you, what they would see would be a skull. Okay, so that would be the answer to this question, would be that when you're sitting in the same place that the character would be sitting, that's what you would see. So being able to embed a couple of these 360 experiences into the escape room has added a lot to it when you aren't able to visit it in person, right? So now that the pandemic is over, we're able to go into these spaces, but I wanted to do one of these based on the Louvre. Well, I'm not going to be able to take my students to Paris. So I needed to, and the Louvre has a million, these 360-degree rooms already made. So to still be able to use these as a way of quote unquote taking a field trip without going, Google Maps has made that process incredibly easy for you to be able to do that. I don't know how to do things like this. So you'll notice that, the image is being shredded and the other one is on fire. This painting over here on the right was incredibly interesting. When it first came to the Walters Art Museum, it looked the way that it does on the right, which is that there was just this woman, but there was nothing in her lap. And then when they cleaned the painting, they found out that there was actually this child that used to be in her lap and she had been painted over. And then they discovered that the child was actually the first child of African descent to have ever been painted in Europe. And so it was this big deal for the Walters Art Museum. And, the Walters really has this kind of like reckoning with its past because, most of the things that are in the Walters, as in most museums, have been taken. And, Henry Walters had people who were enslaved. So they've really been trying to, figure out like how can they kind of, rectify their image. So one of the things I try to do when I'm making these escape rooms, especially for museums, is to call attention to the types of pieces of art that will, kind of explore that mission as well. But the link that I've given you here is to PhotoFunya. And so this, let's see if this will let me go to this link. Is it sharing the right screen or are you still my presentation?
We see the screen.
The PhotoFunya screen? Okay.
Yes.
Great. So what's really nice about PhotoFunya is that it allows you, it just does graphic design for you. So if you have this image of this person's face, you can do all of these different, things with it. You can put her inside of a locket. You can, make her a stamp. You can turn her into Marilyn Monroe. There's so many different categories of all the different kinds of things that you can do with her. You can turn her into a drawing, to make it look like she's just been sketched. And then there's a bunch of options that are already animated too. So I'm saying all of this to say that sometimes the escape rooms, I think, look really daunting in terms of how, visually complicated they look. But again, I don't know how to do all of this. I just spent a lot of time finding it for you. The one that I'm going to show you now, this is a close reading escape room. So what I wanted to show you is, you've seen clips of what I made, and I wanted to show you what the students are able to make, because this particular student, she was 75. So I need you to remember, since I teach at University of Baltimore, my students range anywhere from 18 to 90, right? Because we really cater to an adult population. So when they come across something like this that has technology, I have a lot of students who are like, no, this is not going to be a thing that I can do. And this was one of those students who, she thought she was going to drop my class because she didn't want to have to learn how to make this escape room. So I wanted to show you hers so you can have an idea of, what they really are able to create pretty easily. Hers was designed around the other Black girl. Hulu has just done an adaptation of this book, and then this is what she's made. So hers was all about escaping conflict. So she includes all these different conversations throughout the text, and then she asks the reader to be able to respond to the conversations as an ally. And in order to be able to escape the toxic conversations, you have to be able to answer correctly in order to be able to be a good ally in the workplace. And you can just see like how, incredibly complicated it is in terms of like how many different resources she was using. She was using TED Talks, videos, all of these other things, as part of what she was doing in here. And so, this was a student who was 75 and thought she couldn't use technology. So it was really pretty incredible. So I want to make sure that you have access to all of the different types of options that we have here. So this was an example of a question. She used animation. She incorporated, clips from the media as examples of, microaggressions. And so I just wanted to kind of give you a feel for, how multimodal they really are. And then I've also given you links to ones that have been made for middle schoolers that happen within a library, and given you example of their types of puzzles here. My daughter's class, her kids were really struggling with pre-algebra. So I made them a Wednesday Addams themed escape room that included algebra problems and included things from what they were learning in science as the escape room. And so that was the Wednesday Addams one. I did make a first-year writing escape room because I'm the writing program director. So this one's called Escaping Procrastination, a Possible Horror Story. So that one was a lot of fun. And then I've given you a template as well for if you don't want to make a virtual field trip and you want to make something that would actually go with you, so if you're taking your students to a museum or to a library or to wherever else, and you wanted to have an activity that would take them through the space and make them engage with particular things, then I've given you a template for that as well that tells you how to make that work. And then these are all of the templates. So you have the literature escape room, the field trip, first year writing, skill-based escape room, information literacy, and then an example of the Wednesday Addams one, which is the middle school one, and a field trip template. So I hope I've given you even more than enough to be able to use, but I wanted to make sure that we left some ideas, some time for questions. The last thing that I wanted to show you was I've also given you a much larger link to different types of puzzles. So throughout each of the templates, there are ideas for puzzles, but I've been slowly curating this larger link of puzzle ideas. And I'd love if you kept adding to it. So if you've, get into this and you like, doing this, if you can keep adding things to different kinds of puzzles that students can make, we just keep adding to this list all the time so that they have ideas of cool puzzles that will be fun to incorporate into the escape rooms. Okay. The templates do work. Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, Carla, for letting me know. So Carla let me know that the some of the links don't work, but the template slide does work. So perfect. If you'd like to follow the different kinds of shenanigans my students are getting into making these escape rooms, we just got a grant to make these escape rooms. It's called a community-based learning grant. So since we're creating materials for underprivileged kids in Baltimore City, we've gotten some grant money to go along with what we're doing so that we're making these escape rooms for different populations, and we're always changing who the client is every semester to be able to see like who we think needs them the most. And it's been really fun. I post everything that we're doing on my Instagram, which is paintandinkstudios.com. If you ever want just like one-on-one help making an escape room from start to finish, I genuinely mean it when I say to email me. and then I will help you do it, or I will give you to one of my students because now they all know how to make them too. And they would love that. One of the variations of the class that I do is that if we have enough professors in a semester who are interested in having escape rooms made for them, then that becomes the product that semester. So if there are enough people like in here today who are like, oh my gosh, I like this and this is really cool, but I don't want to have to learn how to make them, then I would pair you with one of my students. You would tell them, you would give them a list of, some of the content that you want your students to learn, and then the students would turn around and make an escape room for you that you could actually use with your students. Okay, I wanted to make sure I gave 15 minutes for questions at the end. So there's your last slide that I was very proud of myself for being able to put in at the last minute. But at this time, I'd like to open it up for some questions.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Z. This has been an incredible body of information. We'll repost that final slide before we end so that you can make sure you get a picture of it if you need a certificate for attending. But please post your questions in the chat, or you may unmute and ask your question as well.
Yes. So I just gave a professional development at a STEM high school, and so they're going to be using the escape rooms to teach their science students. So most of their questions are going to be revolving around like using the periodic table and things like that. So they're going to use the skills-based template that I created, and they're subbing out the questions with everything that's related to science.
Carla asked, how soon would you need to let you know when we would like one done?
Well, I'm currently writing the grant for the fall class. So I think those are due May 30th. So, and I'd need to be able to tell them how many professors we'd actually be making things for in order to secure the grant. So May 30th. In an online course. Okay. So you really can. So I can give you a link to one that was completely online. So in the online course, they really can work asynchronously. So this, for example, the one I'm putting in a chat is an asynchronous one. And so what I have them do is when they finish, they take a screenshot of the completion and then they send it to me, and that's their grade. So they can do that on their own time. What was really interesting about the Wednesday Addams one that I made in the basement of the library was that no one had to be there to run it. You just scan a barcode, and then it takes you through the storyline, and no one has to be there to actually like moderate the room. There has to be a librarian there to like reset the room when you finish. So, and resetting the room really just means closing the locks because everything else was already just there. So they just need to like close the locks and rechange the numbers. But no one even had to be like sitting there to make sure that the room worked okay, because it was meant to be something that could happen without a person running it.
Any other aspects that you want to mention regarding how to do this for an online course?
I would just say the other thing that really needs to be considered is you need to have people run through it multiple times before you actually tell them to plug and play. So my daughter and her friends are probably my most critical beta testers because they're middle schoolers. So if they think something isn't engaging or they think it doesn't work, they're brutal and they let me know. So I have them play test anything that I'm going to run asynchronously through them, because you really do want to catch any of those, problems that are going to trip people up in advance. So that would be my best advice, is just to make sure you really have run through it several times before you put a link there and tell them that they need to do it. Feedback on student learning. Yes. So what they're finding is the research is showing that it's the retention that's really helpful. So instead of just learning the right answer for the test, them being able to recall the information later is much higher because they're associating it with with an experience, right? And they're associating it with the fun. And so it's just they're finding that kind of setting in terms of the anxiety, but it's fun anxiety and it's collaborative, is really helping with information retention. Research writing class. Okay, so you should take a look at the one that I made for first year writing, Cynthia, because that one you could really just replace most of my questions about writing in a first year writing class with information literacy skills that would be more complicated. So if you had, say, if you did a murder mystery, which I would love to do, a murder mystery that was all about a research writing, and coming up with a good search term, or understanding why, you could say, like, why isn't this witness credible, right? So I'm teaching a first year writing class that's all themed around true crime. So if they were going to if I told them to research one of the witnesses, let's say in the Alex Murdaugh case, and I had them actually like go to, that person's profile and try to figure out like why they aren't, credible. And then the answer to why they aren't credible then becomes the first, answer that would unlock the puzzle. I would have a blast with that. That would be really fun.
Please keep coming with your questions. I am going to post the certificate slide for you at the same time. So if you want to take a picture of your screen, you will have that available. Let me take care of that right now.
The other thing that I wanted to say is, like, from my own personal data, I can tell you that attendance has been boosted by about 25% since I started using the escape rooms, because they want to do them. And especially when I put them in the breakout rooms and have them compete against each other to see who can finish it the fastest, the obligation to like not want to let their peers down because they weren't there, becomes less of a thing. So I really have seen a boost in attendance since I've been using the escape rooms, and a lot more cameras turned on, because I asked them to replace their own backgrounds with the set design of what they think the escape room would look like in real life. So that component of, it becoming part of the storyline because of what their background is, I have cameras on. And that for me is a really big deal.
I'm going to
Average time to complete the actions for the escape room, an hour. Yep. And an hour is normally about 15 to 20 puzzles. When the students are designing the escape rooms, I can include all of the draft, like the prompt and the drafting materials too, if this becomes something that you pursue. But when they're making the puzzles, in the first column, they have whatever if it's information literacy, the first column is whatever book they want the user to get to. If it's in a museum, it's whatever piece of art they want the user to get to. If it's close reading, it's whatever passage, they want the reader to get to. And so they fill out that first column with about 15, objects, artifacts, examples. The second column is whatever information they want the player to learn. And then the last column would be the actual puzzle that would go along with what they're trying to teach. In the later iterations of the course, we've really been working on getting the puzzles thematically connected to whatever the question is. So if you're doing, the Wednesday Addams themed puzzle and you want them to learn algebra, right? Like, I made sure that my puzzle was, the ingredients that you would use for a spell, right? So I've really been trying to like play with how can I actually make the puzzles, really connected to the storyline in a tighter way. But that's, this is after doing them for about 3 years now. So hopefully I'm getting better every time I create them.
About time for one more question,
Sure.
if there's any.
It's gonna show you.
All right.
I can show you real quickly. This is one of the more recent ones, just so you can see kind of how they've evolved. So this is the Wednesday Addams one. So you'll see that like they've gotten better from when I first started. So you know, now it has, you know, animation embedded into it, and, you know, the graphics have gotten better. I figured out how to do things like this in PhotoFunya where it makes it look like you're typing. You know, Canva has been a huge help. And so, you know, ones like this have been the more evolved versions. It has music that goes along with it. There have been some where I've said, like, put on this particular Alexa playlist, you know, while you're playing, to try to add like another, you know, sort of sensory component. And that's been really fun too.
So thank you very much, Dr. Z. We really appreciate the information you shared today. I think this was a wonderful presentation. For all of you that have attended, you will also get a link to the recording as well. I hope you learned something, and hope to invite us all to your escape rooms after you build them. We'll all come and try them out for you. All right. And I want to thank everyone else for coming. Thank you very much from MOL, and hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for coming.